Kislev! We have traveled far and fought hard, but at last we have arrived in Khorne's bloody realm. Before us stands the brass citadel, where the blood god's gatekeeper stands guard. We must call out the fiend and slay him! He rallies his demons for a last desperate defense. Vanquish them with ice and steel! This is the ruined fort, defended by Khorne's lesser thralls. Wipe them out and capture the icon of ruin! This will give me a foothold and grant us supplies to reinforce for the struggle ahead!
Well, that was an interesting intro, wasn't it? Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and we're finally here to showcase Total War Warhammer 3. My fellow content creators and I were recently invited into this event where we would be able to play over this specific mission that you're seeing on screen right now. But before we begin, keep in mind that this is a alpha state of the game, so do not take anything like spell effects, stat values or even damage values as gospel, as of course anything that is an alpha state could change in the future. So where are my Kislevites exactly? Well, we are right outside the Brass Citadel, which means that we are in the realms of chaos. This has been described as a special battle that we'll see throughout our campaign, and you'll notice that the battle itself is so drastically different than what we're normally used to. I've only been able to see the one dedicated to Khorne, but I'm assuming that the others will play in a very similar sense. But let's just go into detail of what this actually is. With these special battles, we'll be attacking the personal domains of the gods of chaos themselves. Like I said, we are right now outside the Brass Citadel, and of course we're gonna have to do a few different things to be able to fight the Blood God's servants. They are almost innumerable in number, and we need to fight them at all sides. Whilst we push our way onward through the hordes of Khorne warriors and demons, we need to capture different control points to be able to progress through the map, where each map section is locked to a specific portion of the map. It doesn't take too long to capture the first point, but I'm assuming that this is done just to get the player used to the situation. We'll skip ahead to capturing this location as there's a lot to discuss straight after that.
The icon of ruin is ours! And we have supplies to fortify our position. Use them to construct defensive towers here. We can barricade these bottlenecks. Use the portals to summon fresh troops or heal and upgrade our warriors, using whatever supplies we have left.
Alright, so now let's jump onto the mechanics. As you are aware, we have to capture 3 different locations. These locations have their benefits. For example, now we are able to recruit some new units. Of course, it's unexpected to be able to fight through the Blood God's realm with only a 10 stack. These aren't all the units that you'll get throughout the battle. In fact, you'll start unlocking more as you capture the other points too. It's kind of divided into 3 tiers, so the lower tier units in the first capture point, mid tier units in the second capture point, and of course high tier units in the third. Now what you've probably noticed as I've been playing through the game is that there is a unique resource needed to be able to not only recruit units, but also better their equipment, replenish them, and so many different other things. You'll gain more resource as you do more damage against the Khornates and capture the other points. I must admit, for the first 2 times I played over this battle, budgeting was a bit of a problem. However, that could be because I was excited to play, so I was just trying to see as much as possible. After taking over a control point, you'll see that you'll have to start defending against a rather large wave of enemies. They'll attack from multiple sides, and as of taking over this territory, there will be enemies spawning passively through this area of the map trying to take back this location, which means of course that as you progress to the Brass Citadel through Khorne's bloody realm, you're gonna have to leave some units back to be able to defend the location. Of course, as the Ice Queen herself had explained in a previous cutscene, we can also build up some barricades and even towers to add to extra defenses, so let's check out what exactly we can build now. Constructible terrain was always a much requested feature for the Warhammer series, and we're getting just that with these battles. Using resources, you're able to build up at some specific portions of the map. But not only that, but you have options too. Barricade platforms can be constructed, and yes, you've heard me correctly. These platforms can be used as basic walls, but will also allow you to mount ranged units atop of it to get a 20% plus range bonus. This is of course great if you like to have many ranged units in your armies, and it can be fairly powerful. This by far was my favorite when it came to the building slots. Not only do you have a defensive wall, and of course extra range, but your enemies can also not climb it, so if they want to get to you, they're gonna have to either go to a different location or hack away at the wall, which can take some time as it does have a decent amount of HP. The barricade blocker is your path blocker, a lot of HP and a missile resistance aura, which admittedly might not be too great versus Khorne. This is of course because Khorne doesn't really have a lot of range. However, it's very likely that we'll be seeing these types of constructibles in other parts of Warhammer 3. Missile resistance aura aside, a 10,000 HP pool is absolutely fantastic, and it will hold out for a decent amount of time. The barricade trap itself is rather useful. While it doesn't have a lot of XP, its hex aura of minus 15% speed and minus 15% attack is incredibly useful against Khorne's forces, which are of course very heavily focused on melee. If you know that the Khornate forces are focusing around one specific area, this is really useful to have, though keep in mind that the stats that you're seeing on screen may change upon launch. As I had said earlier on in the video, do not take any stat values as gospel. This is an alpha build, and alpha builds do tend to change around a lot. And lastly, we have the Barricade Monument, which is a buff building. This itself provides a small augment area, and the bonuses are melee attack plus 15% and leadership plus 10. The 4 barricades are extremely varied, so it really much depends on your specific playstyle, and really there's loads of different options for it too. I'm hoping that this makes its way to a finalized siege rework too, as stuff like this would be very useful, especially if we start getting big capitals, big cities. It's something that is incredibly needed and does honestly bring a lot of potential flavor to siege battles. The towers don't really need that much explaining in all honesty. They function as we're already used to in Total War Warhammer. There are 4 different types of towers, and really the only difference is the type of ammunition. You're already used to this type of thing when you've already started building up capital cities, as when you already build up the defenses of your capital cities in say Warhammer 2, you'll get increased ammunition which will do more damage. There are 4 different types of tower ammunition, so really it depends on what suits your playstyle the most, and of course if you have the available resources. Your towers and barricades will of course cost resources, and I must admit that during one playthrough I spent it all in the first location when I really didn't need to. Now I think we've gone over everything in the first section, so let's start progressing into the next.
The blood pits and seize the icon of blood!
It's pretty straightforward as you start moving from point to point. You'll take over a location after defeating a rather powerful wave, and then get a little cutscene to tell you what to do next. The enemies themselves aren't too strong, it's the fact that you're getting constantly assaulted, which is extremely thematic of course. We're deep within the Blood God's realm, so we're expecting to see a lot of resistance. As before, whilst you start moving to the next capture point, you'll deal with a small wave of enemies. I'm assuming this was implemented so it gives you some time to get your bearings sorted. What you will notice is as you capture more points, including the first one, you will get more different types of units available to you, so you'll start progressing into the higher tier units. Also, I had mentioned this before, but it's important to reiterate. So I had mentioned that enemies will constantly spawn, and this much is true. They won't spawn constantly around the area where you are going to progress to, but instead round about the beginning area of the map. The constantly spawning waves aren't too much of a hassle. Building some towers will make it a lot easier, and of course leaving some troops there in defense also does help. The constantly spawning waves will get a little harder as you start taking over more and more capture points, but at the very beginning you'll only have to deal with some warhounds, and then it'll start getting harder with the inclusion of furies and even chaos spawn. The capture points themselves won't determine if you win or lose this battle, however, keeping them under your control is always very beneficial, as they do provide various different bonuses. Interestingly enough, I had noticed that they only attack you from the first location, so you don't really need to leave some units in the second capture point. And the first one is defendable enough as long as you have some decently strong warriors there and enough towers to shoot down the enemy as they spawn. So let's talk about the elephant in the room. You might have noticed that the Winds of Magic meter is very different and there's a lot more than usual. This is because Winds of Magic within these special missions are infinite. You will keep regenerating Winds of Magic and keep being able to cast spells. It makes sense, as of course the Realm of Chaos is a magical place where magic flows extremely freely. Mechanically also this makes a lot of sense, as magic is very important in Total War Warhammer, and if you're going to be dealing with an infinite amount of enemies spawning and attacking you constantly, well, it makes sense for you to be able to also have magic too. Again, I have to reiterate, do not take the damage output of the spells or the stats as gospel, as of course this is alpha. But with all that being said, let's move on to the second wave. The second wave will trigger in the same way as the first. As soon as you capture the next capture point, then they'll start to spawn. However, as you are getting more and more powerful and recruiting new units, so are your enemies, where now you'll start to see some juggernauts of Khorne, for example. There is more access, however, to new construction slots, so you can build up new towers, new walls, or whatever you actually need. This time the wave is a little harder. While in the first wave you would get enemies arriving from one side and you'd have to kill them all off before they'd arrive from the other, in the second wave they'll come from two sides, so it's nice to see that there is a bit of a difficulty creep coming up. Not only will you have to start dividing your forces between both waves, but you've already divided them a little bit by leaving a few units in the first area to defend it. Though if you've been smart with your resources, which thankfully in this run I was able to recruit units directly from the capture point that I'd just taken. This is actually quite beneficial, as it means that all three capture points can act as your unit spawners, so if you need some reinforcements in spawn 1, you can spawn them there without a problem, providing that you have access to said units. You'll also start to notice that my army is actually getting quite varied now. More and more units have been unlocked. We're seeing a fair amount of obviously unique units which have been created by Games Workshop and Creative Assembly. These reinforcement units are limited and you can't really doomstack with them. I'm not too sure how this is going to work when you originally trigger the battle. I am of course assuming here that we might be able to have our own full 20 stack when we come in, and then we'll be able to carry on through there, recruiting any units as we start to lose some, or if it's very much dependent on how your stack is by the time that you trigger the event. So say that you'll only get access to a few units. It could be a rather interesting thing very late game if you could do this with your complete doom stacks, though I mean that might make it a bit too easy. The battle itself is definitely getting a little harder as you're getting constantly swarmed, and it's feeling really thematic. Personally, I was worried that if we're going to go into the realms of chaos, that we might see this being too much of a cakewalk. But even with just basic alpha balancing, there are some times where if you're not thinking ahead, you will lose a lot of troops. I'm not too sure what difficulty this is on, but I'm assuming since it's an alpha state, it's probably around what we can expect to be normal mode. And honestly, I'm very curious to see how this will play in harder difficulties, as I just prefer to play more or less around very hard in most times. I'm assuming that the enemies will get a little stronger and the waves will be much more deadlier, or that's at least what I hope.
One final push to the boiling moat! We must seize the icon of torment and tempt Khorne's gatekeeper from his lair!
So we're going for the final push to take the third and final capture point. And sometimes these cinematics show something really interesting. You might have noticed that there's a flying Bloodthirster, which is actually really good news. Bloodthirsters are known to fly, and I was worried that such a large target was going to be constantly on the ground. While it's flying, yes, it can be a bit of a target, but mind you, it's something which is going to be relatively powerful at least. It's important to note here that yes, a lot of stuff is dying very quickly during this battle, but the fact that this is alpha gameplay aside, this is also intended for these specific types of battles. Your enemy stats are scaled down in these specific battles, and that's obviously because you're constantly being attacked. If they had the normal vanilla stats that they would have in the standard campaign, then things might get a bit too difficult. I'm assuming that higher difficulties will increase the stats too, so if you play for example in Legendary, then everything will have the stats of its intended campaign. The third wave will once again act like the second. You're being attacked from two different sides, but the enemies are getting stronger and they're getting more different types of units. For example, at this point you're going to start seeing some artillery. Skull cannons of Khorne will be able to do a decent amount of damage, and you need to get rid of them fairly quick. It's also important to note that at this point you're also getting attacked very heavily down south, and it is quite a bit of a nuisance when you're trying to fight on multiple fronts. Obviously, Khorne the Blood God is aware of your presence at this point, and he is sending out as much as possible.
Khorne's gatekeeper shows himself at last! Warriors of Kislev, prepare for the fight of your lives!
Of course, these types of battles in other games always have some type of boss, don't they? And it does also here too. Here, Khorne himself has sent out his gatekeeper, an exalted Bloodthirster of Khorne. This is actually quite good, because, well, I was kind of worried that we were going to deal with, well, Khorne himself. And of course, power level wise, it doesn't really make sense to fight against the god, but against a very powerful Bloodthirster acting as his avatar in a sense, that works out rather well. Now this is where the difficulty ramps up just a little more. The boss himself is quite powerful, but you're also going to be dealing with enemies constantly spawning. This isn't like the waves of before, where a wave will eventually run out. And you're starting to get more and more high tier units, all whilst your southern point of the map, that of the original capture point, is being beset upon by a lot of enemies, mostly some very powerful chaos spawn which are going to be able to take over that territory if you've not defended it correctly. The boss can take a lot of damage and will do a lot of damage to you, so it's actually quite a bit of a hectic fight when it gets to the end. So whilst we're watching some footage of said fight, let me just give my thoughts so far regarding Warhammer 3. Firstly, it's important to note that A, this is not a review, this is just through my first impressions, as I was invited by Creative Assembly, being one of their Total War content partners, to take part in this event. This event was 3 hours long, and I was only able to play this battle over and over. Now, as a fan of Warhammer Fantasy for many years and Total War, this shows a lot of promise. I mean, if we start comparing what we've already seen for Total War Warhammer 3 through this battle alone to, well, just Game 2 or Game 1, there is a lot of drastic differences when it comes to battles. It feels like melee is a lot more viable now. I'm not too sure if this is intended or not, it could just be the balancing, but bear in mind that we're fighting against Khorne, and Khorne is very focused on melee combat, so it's looking rather good there. The fact that we have buildable barricades and towers and so on is interesting, and I hope that it's not just for these specific types of battles. If something like that were to find itself in a Siege rework, well, then Sieges would be absolutely phenomenal, as it would give an element of choice to the defending player if that's the case, and hopefully we can start to see stuff like this being implemented across the board. Unit-wise, the models look great. Yes, we're seeing a lot of red here, but then again, this is Khorne, so we're going to be seeing a lot of red when it comes to that. Though the Kislevites look absolutely phenomenal. I'm talking about this in a design perspective as, of course, we're looking at this through fresh eyes. These models were never on the tabletop. We've seen some concept art, as of course we're expecting these units for the Kislevites to eventually make their way to Warhammer the Old World, but it's just really good to see them in a more 3D form. All in all, I'm feeling hopeful for the game, and it looks like Creative Assembly are really going all out. If this is going to be the standard for Warhammer 3, then I honestly can't wait to see what else they have planned. This is just the reveal of one thing that's going to be taking part in the campaign, which I can also confirm is also going to be in a survival mode which you can play with a friend. So it's not campaign exclusive, which is absolutely fantastic because I could see myself playing these types of maps over and over. There's just so much to discuss here that one video is not going to do enough. As you can expect, I'm going to be dropping quite a number of videos as the days progress, as there's a lot of things to discuss, possible lore changes, and just a few other things of interest. I am feeling rather hopeful with what's to come in the future, and it looks like Warhammer 3 is going to get the massive reveal and massive send-off that this trilogy deserves. There's still one more in-game cinematic left, so I suggest watching until the end if you want to see that too. But until then, I've just got to say that I feel very hopeful for this new title. I honestly can't wait to see more. As far as I can see aesthetically and gameplay wise, there's an improvement from game 1 and 2, so I just can't wait to see what else they have planned, especially since we've only really seen one specific type of battle, and we've only seen a bit of Kislev and a bit of Khorne. We haven't seen their in-game mechanics, we haven't seen their campaign, and we're still waiting for Nurgle, Tzeentch, Cathay, and Slaanesh. So there's a lot to be excited for. But what do you guys think about this so far? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, as I'm rather curious. This is the first gameplay reveal, of course. I'll leave you off with the final cinematic, and we'll be back very soon with another video.
My brave Kislevites, we stand triumphant. But Khorne is not the only dark god with a realm in this accursed place. The battle is won, but the war goes on! Come, we must continue our search for what is lost.
But with that, my friends, we've come to the end of our video. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, might I suggest giving the video a like, or even subscribing to the channel, as it really does help us out. In the description section below are various links to different social media platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, and Discord. Also in the description section is an affiliate link with Element Games where you could buy loads of hobby-based products, not just Warhammer, for 10 to 25% off. Making a purchase using that link and also our special code, which is also in the description, supports the channel at no extra cost to you, which we think is rather cool. A big thank you to our patrons. Your support means the world to us. It's amazing that people want to help a small channel like us grow and get to a higher level of content. A big thank you to Gibraltar LUSC, Ryan Bertsche, Andrew Prince, and Okro for subscribing to us at our Fane level. You guys are super cool. And a big thank you to Edward Yule, VS Vasan, Aaron Whitman, and Shaggy for subscribing to us at our King level. Honestly, we can't thank you all enough. And lastly, a big thank you to all of you for liking, sharing, and commenting on these videos. Honestly, it's because of you guys that the channel has been growing at such a great pace lately, so we can't thank you all enough. But with that, my friends, thank you so much for watching once again, and we shall see you all again very, very soon. Have a good day.